Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on From the South. We begin this morning in Colombia. That's where President Juan Manuel Santos has announced he expects the permanent bilateral ceasefire with the FARC to be implemented December 16th and not January 1st of next year, as he had previously said. Now, he also said he would ask the UN Security Council for a mandate to verify the definitive truce that would mark the end of the 54-year conflict with the FARC. Well, it would be the ceasefire. The FARC has been insisting on a bilateral ceasefire for quite some time, and in previous rejections, the FARC have declared a unilateral ceasefire. Both sides have been negotiating peace in Cuba since November 2012 and recently set a March 23rd deadline for a final peace agreement. Our correspondent in Bogota now, Natalia Margarita, has reactions to Santos's announcements.
For almost 4 months, the FARC have implemented a unilateral ceasefire. Since then, Colombia has experienced a reduction in violence not seen since 1974. That is according to the Conflict Analysis Center, whose director considers it's time to take the FARC ceasefire one step forward.
We are late for the implementation of a bilateral ceasefire. Of course, that needs to be agreed within the peace negotiations, otherwise it won't be sustainable and have the verification mechanisms that are necessary for the legitimacy of a bilateral ceasefire.
The verification mechanisms are among the issues President Santos has urged an agreement be reached on as a condition for a timely implementation of the bilateral ceasefire that the FARC has repeatedly called for.
I hope that up to the 31st of December, we can, for instance, conclude the fifth point of the peace talks agenda, which is the end of the conflict, so that we can decree a bilateral and internationally verified ceasefire starting from the 1st of January.
The fifth point of the agenda includes the issues of demobilization and disarmament, but also all the technicalities that a bilateral ceasefire will necessarily imply, subjects that a technical commission is dealing with in Havana.
It is a topic that is being discussed, and is crucial in order to guarantee that there will be no hostilities between the parties that subscribe to ceasefire. There need to be some sort of control and verification, and that discussion has not concluded yet.
Now, the FARC has suggested there is no need to wait until January next year for a bilateral ceasefire, when it could rather come as a good Christmas gift for Colombians, something to which President Santos has reacted positively.
If we Colombians have already felt a reduction in violence, and the last 2 months have been the least violent in terms of armed conflict, now imagine how amazing it would be to have our first Christmas with no arms.
The announcement comes right ahead of the beginning of a new round of peace talks next week, bringing high the expectations of many Colombians. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
Here next door in Venezuela, the government here has launched a Twitter campaign under the slogan, "I Sign for Peace." Now, it's aimed at promoting a peaceful environment ahead of the upcoming December 6th parliamentary elections. The initiative, promoted by President Nicolás Maduro, urges all Venezuelans to respect the electoral process on Election Day. Now, he says it's a move to prevent right-wing destabilization attempts during or after the elections. The opposition MUD coalition has refused to sign the agreement. In Brazil now, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva says he will survive the investigations he considers to be an attack against him and his family as the right wing continues their efforts to discredit the socialist government led by the Workers' Party. Lula enjoys a very high rate of popularity, and in fact various polls show that he would win the 2018 presidential elections if he were to run. Now, he condemned the recent police search carried out against his son's company as part of the destabilization efforts of the right wing. And as we do every morning, we now take a look at some of the other stories making the news around the world.
President Barack Obama won passage by the U.S. Congress of legislation that lifted the threat of a default on government debt through the end of his presidency. The bill lifts the ceiling on federal borrowing. It allows for an additional $80 billion in military and domestic spending, but contemplates huge cuts in social investment. The Senate voted 64 to 35 in favor of the bill, but lawmakers still need to allocate that money among thousands of budget line items before a December 11 deadline. Obama commented on the bill before the vote.
And it's an actual bipartisan compromise, which hasn't been happening in Washington a lot lately. Locks in 2 years of funding for budgets that finally free us from this cycle of shutdown threats and last-minute patchwork fixes. It allows us to plan for the future, and as a consequence, will allow your departments to plan for the future. So that's good news for everybody. It's a step forward.
The U.S. Navy scrambled 4 fighter jets in response to 2 Russian aircraft that were flying near the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan. The incident occurred on Tuesday but was not reported on immediately. 2 Russian aircraft flew within close proximity to the USS Ronald Reagan, which was participating in a bilateral training exercise with South Korea in the Korean Peninsula in the Sea of Japan. White House spokesperson Josh Earnest said the incident was not a particularly threatening encounter. International talks aimed at resolving the conflict in Syria recently began in Vienna. The meeting will count with the participation of U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and foreign affairs officials of Iran, the EU, UK, Egypt, Qatar, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and France. The U.S. has shifted from speaking of escalating their military actions in Syria to backing a political solution. Many countries have rejected further armed intervention in the Arab country, including Germany and China.
The international community should not just sit there waiting passively, but work hard to create right conditions to push forward, reset political process.
Clashes continue to engulf the West Bank city of Hebron after 2 Palestinians were shot dead after allegedly injuring an Israeli border guard with a knife. Several Palestinians were wounded, at least 6 others were arrested. Hebron has been at the center of clashes following 6 weeks of Israeli-Palestinian violence. Local reports say close to 60 Palestinians have been shot dead by Israeli security forces since early October. 6 Israelis have allegedly been killed by Palestinians in the recent spate of violence.
Well, a big wobble on the beam and a tumble out of bounds on the floor could not wipe Simone Biles' smile. She became the first woman to win 3 straight all-around titles at the Gymnastics World Championships in Glasgow, Scotland. Now, the 18-year-old U.S. athlete captured gold with a combined total of 60.399. Biles' latest victory here has earned her an 8th gold medal at the Worlds, and she will now go to Rio next year as the overwhelming favorite. Congratulations to her. Plenty more on all of those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Have a great Friday. We'll see you back here in just a few hours.